job.
But we really enjoyed it. We had a good
He's
here, but he's not here.
Yeah.
Good.
I
Thank you
forgot.
for doing that. That's a difficult,
I'll remind him what time it is.
difficult undertaking.
Yeah, he's right there.
One of us
There he is, okay.
at dinner.
All right, thank you.
Oh, they're cute.
Yeah, they are.
I guess
Dominique and Charles.
Yeah. Are they still with you?
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started.
Respite.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Wow.
Get started. I call to order the meeting of the Manassas Park Governing Body for Tuesday, April 5th, 2022. First, we have approval of the agenda. I believe we have a closed session, City Attorney?
Closed
Two
sessions.
closed sessions.
Yeah, I think he's finding a chair, but it's, let me see.
Cinema Cafe contract negotiations and Health Department transition pursuant to paragraph 8.
Yes, that's correct.
Virginia Code 2.2-3711A. I guess that takes care of it. Are there any other edits or changes to the agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you. Please join us in a moment of silence and the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have one individual signed up to make public comment. Mr. Gardner, would you go to the podium, state your name, address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes? City Attorney will be timekeeper.
You actually won't need that. But my name's Kendall Gardner. I live at 114 Martin Drive. And again, I bring up the issue of my water bill for the, I think, third time. And I'm hoping that some year something will be done. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Has anyone else sent in comments, called in, anything? Is there anyone here who is not signed up to make public comment but would still like to make public comment? Seeing no one and hearing no one, we will move on. There is no information, no presentation, no recognition. This moves us down to consent agenda. Consent agenda consists of approval of the minutes of March 1st and March 15th of 2022, and the appointment of Ms. Luana L. Bryant to serve on the city's Economic Development Authority for the remainder of a vacant term that will expire on November 18th, 2025. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Bryant, for volunteering to serve. Okay. Moving on to 9A. It is Bull Run ASAP Agreement for Fiscal Services Renewal.
On.
Who is that?
Good evening, council members, the mayor, and the audience. Sorry, I have to make a call from home because I have an oral surgery tonight. Thank you. Our agreement between the city and the ASAP Run has been expired. I have been working very closely with the city manager and the city attorney to update the contract. In front of you is an updated version to reflect a few things. One, the fiscal service fee will go up from 15.5 to 20,000. That will in right away. That will be another year until that become effective to have the ASAP run with that cash flow issue. In addition to that change, other operational changes include the direct payment of that payroll directly from the bank account and any other services that we have been rendering since 2010 to agency. If you don't have any questions for me, I will recommend the staff recommend that the governing body authorize the city manager to sign the contract so that we have become effective in the month of April that we are in right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Pon. Any comments or questions
You're
from the
welcome.
governing body? No? Okay. Apparently no questions, so the recommended motion is that the governing body approve and authorize the city manager to sign a fiscal service renewal agreement with ASAP Bull Run as presented and subject to final review by city attorney.
Moved?
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you, Pon. Moving
Thank
on.
you.
Moving on to resolution in support of raised grant application.
Meeting Mayor, Full Vice Mayor Banks, members of council, citizen staff, and guests, and Calvin Odell, the Director of Community Development. The U.S. DOT has announced a funding opportunity through the RAISE grant program, reinvesting in American infrastructure with sustainability and equity. There's a rather large pool of money out there with maximum award per application of $25 million. Staff has been diligently preparing an application to repair the culverts under Railroad Drive. We have 2 sets of culverts that run under Railroad Drive. If any of those culverts were to fail and cause roadway failure, there would be no access to the VRE station until the garage was built. And still no access to the surface lot, which would cut the parking in half. The merit criteria for the grant, though, are fairly complex. So to meet as many of the merit criteria as possible, we've sort of joined this project into numerous projects that include increased pedestrian access, pedestrian crossings, bicycle lanes, bicycle racks, electric charging stations in the VRE garage, and then we're waiting for the completion of the complete street study to provide even further recommendations for improvements we can make for access and mobility in the area. Staff's recommendation is that the governing body approve the resolution. We're currently eyeing an approximate $14 million application for this project. Staff's recommendation is the governing body authorize this resolution or approve this resolution for staff to apply for an estimated $14 million through this RAISE program. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Calvin. The motion is that the governing body adopt a resolution in support of the city's DOT RAISE grant application as presented.
Moved? Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope we win it.
Pardon?
I hope we win it.
Yes. Okay, moving on to congressionally directed spending for Route 28 Innovative Intersection Design Engineering.
Mayor and members of the governing body, a reminder to you all and to the public, the U.S. Congress reactivated a program that they're calling now Congressionally Directed Spending, what used to be called earmarks prior to 2010 when they stopped doing it. They restarted it last year. We found out about it, and Merchant McIntyre helped us apply for a congressionally directed spending program last year for our security camera system and all of our security systems for the police department. We were awarded $450,000, which is very exciting. So we want to continue to take advantage of this to apply for important community projects for our city. And we thank our 2 senators, Senator Kane and Warner, for championing our project through Congress, and we hope we have their continued support in doing so. Now, we were evaluating submitting the culverts for the Railroad Drive culverts because of the benefit it would have for the VRE access as well for our region. But we're already applying for some other federal grants for that we feel pretty strongly about, and so we wanted to focus our efforts on those grants. In the future, we'll look at other big projects like potentially stream restoration as an option as well. We're just not ready to submit those projects yet for congressionally directed spending applications. So what we did instead, Delegate Rome reached out to the mayor a few weeks ago with requests to see if we can't help move the Route 28 Innovative Intersections project a little bit forward. So, we looked at that. We didn't feel like we had enough time to turn around, but luckily both senators kind of pushed back their deadlines for when their requests were due, and we met with the delegates' staff. We talked about what we should actually apply for. We spoke with Merchant McIntyre to get their recommendations. So what we came back with is applying for just the design engineering so that we improve our chances of getting awarded. So the agenda says $3 million, but Steve crunched the numbers, and it's going to be more like $3.3 million that we're going to be requesting just for design engineering. The value of doing that, if we can get awarded the design engineering funding this year, we can complete that component of the project, and now it's a shovel-ready project that we can go then aggressively after next year additional federal grant programs. We don't think that any that we probably won't be able to get the full funding for the project via the congressionally directed spending programs, but we can either break it up in chunks and try to do it that way, or continue to apply for other federal grants now that we have design engineering done. So we're crossing our fingers that we can get this funding, but we want to seek your approval for city staff to submit this application and to get your support, and authorize the mayor to sign also a letter of support on behalf of the city in support of this project.
Any comments or questions?
I
Yes,
comment.
Vice Mayor Banks.
Route 28 goes through multiple jurisdictions, and I'm in support of this because it's not going to take one silver bullet solution to solve the traffic congestion problem in Route 28 because of its complexity of issues as well as the multiple jurisdictions I just mentioned that it goes through. So I support this in all of our efforts we're taking, and look forward to this happening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Okay, the recommended staff motion is that the governing body adopt a resolution in support of the city's application for congressionally directed spending for design engineering of the Route 28 Centerville Road corridor improvements, otherwise known as innovative intersections, as presented.
Moved. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you. This now brings us to City Manager's FY23 proposed budget. Before we get started, I first want to say a couple words. I want to congratulate both City Manager and City staff for your budgeting expertise and for all the good stewardship of taxpayer funds. That I think it's incredibly important we realize that. This is an excellent proposed budget, and it shows how far the city's come. We're not completely there yet, but we're well on our way, and this shows that we're well on our way. And we're on our way through good management and through careful use of resources. Over the years, we know that staff has been asked to do a lot with very little, and we are deeply grateful for that. So this budget I think we all need to acknowledge and to recognize that city staff and city manager have provided the governing body with the ability to lower the tax rate by 8 cents, and at the same time, still maintaining balance with all the unmet needs that the city has. So credit where credit is due. We want to thank you all so very much for your hard work. And I can only say that you all are a blessing to the city. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for your kind words, and I just want to echo that and thank the entire team for putting the budget together, especially Tony. He's probably sick of looking at the budget at this point, so thank you, Tony, and thank you all. So good evening again, members of the governing body and residents watching from home. We're excited to present this budget. This is probably the most exciting budget that I've had to present. The first one was not very exciting. 4 years ago, we were in a very different situation than we are today. We had to do a lot of fixing at that time, and we had to go into survival mode at that time, and now we're moving more towards becoming a sustainable city and soon hopefully a prosperous city. That's the goal. So highlights for the FY23 budget, we want to tackle the number one issue for our residents when we did our town halls, and the number one issue for our employees when I surveyed employees multiple times over the last few years. And we were able to do both this fiscal year. So for residents, we did two types of tax rate reductions, an 8-cent reduction in the FY23 real estate tax bill. So as a reminder, we were at $1.55 for $100 of assessed value for a few years. And then last year, when we fixed our financial situation, we began with a 2-cent reduction last year. And then this year, we were able to do a much more robust 8 cents. So we reduced the tax rate by 10 cents over the last 2 years, which is more than I ever imagined we would be able to do. There's a lot of reasons why we were able to do that, and very excited, and I think that's a very reasonable start, and we still, like the mayor said, we still need to be a little bit cautious here. We're still not fully out of the situation that we inherited, but we're getting there, and as we continue to be prosperous in other avenues, especially with the downtown, we're going to be able to do more and more things for our residents. This 8-cent reduction is the third largest decrease so far, at least when we did our research for what was being proposed in the region. That could change, of course, with other governing bodies in the region who may want to do more than what their county executives, county administrators, city managers may be proposing, but this was a very aggressive tax rate. We looked at everyone else and we said we wanted to compete with everyone else with what they were doing in terms of tax rate reduction. Gets us very close to the rates for both the town of Herndon and town of Vienna. If you're a resident there, you pay the tax to Fairfax County, and you also pay the local town tax. So now we're very close to those jurisdictions, which is saying a lot considering that their wealth is much greater than ours. They have a much stronger tax base than we do, and our tax rates are getting close to them. So I think we're giving a great deal to our residents when you stack them up to other localities in Northern Virginia, but we're not satisfied with this. We want to continue going forward, and that's why we're pushing hard with the downtown development, so we can do even more and get below their numbers as well, so we can be even more competitive to support our residents, especially as housing becomes less affordable. We want to help out our residents with reducing at least their tax burden so they can afford to remain in Northern Virginia, and we can continue to try to tackle housing affordability as well. The second tax rate reduction we proposed was a 50 cents reduction to the personal property tax specifically for motor vehicles. So it's currently $3.50. We're proposing to lower it down to $3. We've had the lowest rate in all Northern Virginia. We want to continue to have the lowest rate in all Northern Virginia. This is a valuable tax rate reduction to do because it helps out everyone, everyone who owns a vehicle, renters and homeowners. More city residents will benefit from this tax reduction, so we wanted to pursue this as well. There's been inflation in car values over the last couple of years because of COVID-19, logistical supply chain issues across the industry. So car values are going up, and we want to provide some support to our residents to not feel that impact over this year. So we want to reduce that. We're recommending that you reduce that rate. When you look at the dollar amounts for what we're giving back to our residents in terms of tax relief, it's $2.6 million, which is a very significant investment on our part back to our residents. For our employees, we've heard it over and over the last few years. They love working here, but it's hard to stick around and justify that to their families when the pay gap is so significant. So what we did over the last couple of years, we started looking at competitors and see if we can't get closer. We started looking at Manassas and Prince William County. We learned very quickly competing with counties is a difficult proposition for smaller cities. So we looked at what made more sense for us was comparing us to our sister cities, Manassas City, Falls Church, and Fairfax City, and trying to get to the average of what they pay. But we knew we couldn't do that all in 1 year, right? We didn't have the financial means to do that. So we structured last year a plan to cut the gap between what our employees make and what our competitors are giving by 25% per year over 4 years. Luckily, with the receipt of ARPA funding, we were able to front load a lot of that. So this year I'm proposing we use ARPA money along with city money because not every employee qualifies for ARPA premium pay adjustments, but we use both funding sources to reduce the market salary gap this year by 75% for the majority of employees. Not every employee gets to the 75% gap. Again, we had to still have a relatively conservative budget, but the overwhelming majority of our employees get their gap reduced by 75%. It averages out to about 11.68% annual increase from last year in terms of salary. So it's the most robust pay raise we've done in a very long time for our employees, and we hope that will help improve morale of our employees. And then it's again, in 3 years, we'll cover those who couldn't get the 75% this year, and then in 4 years, we'll close the gap completely. And you'll see later on in this slide or in this presentation that we also want to continue to do COLAs as well to keep up with the other jurisdictions. We can't just catch up to everyone from a market standpoint and then continue to fall behind as they all make adjustments as well. But the cost of this to our city, the total is about $1.4 million to reduce this gap by 75%. So you can see how much we're investing both in giving back money to our residents this year and giving back money to our employees as well, which have been kind of the top issues we've been trying to address over the last few years. So this is very exciting to be able to propose this tonight.
And how much of that is city money?
I want to say about $480,000 is city money, and then $940,000, I believe, is ARPA.
Okay.
So in terms of operational excellence, so this model, again, I always present a 10-year model, what we're looking to do. over the next 10 years and also see if we're financially sustainable or not. And so we're proposing 27 new positions over the 10-year model to raise FTE levels about 25% above where we were in FY 2009. This current year, we're 30% bigger than we were in 2009. So over the next few years, we're going to continue to grow. So by the end of this 10-year model, we'll be much more than 30% bigger than we were in 2009. But at least this helps us close that gap even further while still being incredibly efficient and productive in terms of service delivery for our residents. For FY23, we're proposing to add 4 new FTEs, a customer service representative, and I'll go over in detail when I get to the FTE slide on what that is, the assistant city attorney, and then the 2 dispatchers that we discussed a few weeks ago as a priority hire as well. The combined cost for this is $267,000. So you can see we're spending tenfold more on tax rate reductions than on new FTEs, and we're spending a lot more also on investments in our existing employees in terms of salary adjustments than we are on new FTEs as well. In terms of infrastructure, the CIP is very well funded, not like a few years ago we had to defer a lot of our capital. We're doing a good job now, better funding our capital. There are a few exceptions, so we didn't budget for the dark fiber project. We want to continue to lease out with Comcast, but that is something we may have to look for in the future, but it's a large project, so we want to continue to defer that as long as we can. And then road maintenance, some good news. We, instead of having a 75% underfunding in our annual road maintenance requirements, it's now a 50% reduction. So we cut that by 25% over the 10-year model to invest more in transportation infrastructure in terms of maintaining our existing transportation infrastructure, repaving our roads every year. So we're not still spending what the recommended amounts are. We're very excited this year to get back the results of the analysis that Calvin and his team did with the updated technology to analyze our roads, and we'll come back with kind of what the latest data is. But at least when Calvin did this analysis a few years ago, the recommendation was you got to be spending at least $1 million a year to get ahead of the road deterioration. So we are closing that gap slightly, but we're still 50% underfunded in terms of investing in road maintenance. But again, we wanted to prioritize those other issues above that are higher than that. Financial responsibility, this was our #1 priority for the longest time because of how far back we were. We've gotten so much better, but it's still something we need to keep our eyes on. And we continue to fund a very strong reserve position in this model. We've already met our 15% fund balance requirement. We did that at the end of fiscal year 20. And the true amount, the actual financial position of the city will get to 15% fund balance by FY24. There's nothing magical about that 15%. That was just the requirement that our debt owners provided to the city back in 2012 as a reason to approve lending at that time, is that we promised that we would keep that 15%. We're actually more aggressive when you look at the actual budget in terms of reserve targets above that 15%. When you look at S&P, Moody's, how they actually grade the health of jurisdictions, you need to have more than 15% to get a strong bond rating, unless you're a very wealthy community like Loudoun County, Fairfax County, who they know a 1 penny increase in their tax rate is significant. They can quickly catch up. Jurisdictions like us, we need to have stronger reserve positions because we have a lot less flexibility. So that's where we're at from a total overall highlight for this budget. And I'll move into more details tonight. I want to start first with your guidance that you provided to me. We summarized and put together all the survey results, and I took kind of the top scoring ones from each of the overall priorities that you set last spring and talk about how we address those. I'll go over my executive summary. I'll go over the entire city budget, starting with the general fund, including a discussion of ARPA as well, where we're at with ARPA. And you'll see that I posted the ARPA spreadsheet as well, so if you want to take a look at that, you can look at ARPA and see any modifications that you want to make to that budget as well. And I'll highlight tonight what we've changed since the last ARPA approved budget. And then I'll end with a discussion of our enterprise funds, go over the spreadsheets, and then discuss next steps. So I'll start tonight again with the governing body priorities. These priorities were set out last year. They are economic development, balancing slicing of the pie, so the whole economy and how we invest the resources that we have, community maintenance, infrastructure, financial management, service delivery and staffing, and then we always have a miscellaneous category as well for other things that may be priorities but don't necessarily fit into these different categories. We came up with specific action items this year to fund, and you all filled out the surveys, and we ran the numbers, and these were the highest scoring items from each of these sections. So you can see From an economic development standpoint, we're spending about, in this 10-year model, and specifically over the next few years, we're investing $2.6 million, the majority of which is being ARPA, to help with the success of our downtown and economic growth. And you can see some of the infrastructure projects we want to do that Calvin was addressing earlier tonight that we actually want to apply for grants to cover. But there's a lot more we want to do in terms of downtown infrastructure as well to improve access and mobility and ensure the strength and success of the downtown. So that's what we're investing for your number one priority. For the number one priority for the balanced slicing of the pie was reduce the tax rates, reduce property tax rates, and we did that as I discussed in a previous slide, a total of $2.6 million in tax relief via both real estate tax reduction and personal property tax rate reductions. Number three, you can see there the continued focus on staff raises. Already talked about that, about $1.4 million being invested in pay raises this year to reduce the gap by 75% this year and 100% by FY26. Community maintenance, the highest scoring one there was the parking signs to prohibit the commercial vehicle parking in the residential sections overnight. So we do have that budgeted in the CIP for FY23 at $250,000, and Calvin and his team are still working on the actual RFP that we want to get out for a vendor to go ahead and implement that project. In terms of infrastructure, the big items, transportation, you can see in the FY23 budget, we're investing $7 million in transportation. This is not coming out of real estate tax money or personal property tax money. It comes out of the majority comes from VDOT and then NVTA, the funding that we get from the Northern Virginia Tax Authority. We don't use our motor fuel taxes, very minimal. We do that on some signage projects, but we're not using that heavily for transportation. So most of the motor fuels taxes that our residents are paying when they fill up at the pump, that goes to sustain the PRTC operations themselves and to help us fund that fund balance. And then extending the sidewalk along Manassas Drive by the tracks, that scored very high as well. That's on the other side of the railroad tracks when you're coming from City Hall and going to the east side of our city. When you cross the tracks, you'll notice on both sides there aren't any sidewalks. That was a very highly rated project from you all, and so we are adding that to our downtown infrastructure budget, and we hope to get the RAISE grant to be able to fund that, but we are throwing in as a placeholder using city transportation dollars to knock out those projects even if we don't get the grants. But we hope to get the grants so we can go ahead and cover those expenditures, including that project as well. Financial management, we continue to contribute to reserves. So we've been contributing to reserves over the last few years simply by having tight budgets and getting the surpluses at the end of the year. This is the first time we're actually budgeting a significant contribution to build up our reserve position. So about $2.1 million contribution to reserves. You can see that's not as high as the tax rate reduction amount, but a significant amount to be contributing to reserves.
Before I continue, for the extending sidewalk, there's $600,000. Is that coming from the $2.6 million for the economic development?
Part of it, yeah. So you get the 600,000 piece. That's kind of, we're counting that as economic
so you're gonna
development as well.
count-
So it showcased both areas. It may end up being more than that. We're putting that as kind of a placeholder. We need the complete streets analysis to be done, and they'll come back with numbers for everything as well. But again, we're being very aggressive with the grant application process. We submitted we're working on submitting a very comprehensive RAISE grant that Merchant McIntyre is helping us out that will score higher because it includes multiple things. We just wanted to submit for the railroad culverts, but when they saw what was approved from other jurisdictions, they actually recommended that we incorporate a lot more of our downtown infrastructure into that application. That's why we're doing that.
Okay. So there's nothing separate funds for this sidewalk? Okay.
For the second financial management priority, that was the new enterprise resource platform. That funding is majority ARPA going towards that effort. So if you think about kind of the city's major performance deficits, kind of why we have the high tax rates, if you will, this is up there. This is one of the issues, right, that has held us back financially. The high debt is one of the issues that's held us back, and then the failure across the street and what that did to our economy. And those are the three big issues that have kind of slow down progress for our city, and we're tackling all three, and we have been tackling all three over the last few years, and we continue to do so in this budget. And just to clarify, the debt position this year did drop, and I'm going to mention that later as well. 100% of that money went towards tax relief this year. I know that was a goal kind of being expressed, is can we apply that debt savings that we're getting this year from our efforts to tax relief, and we did that. The service delivery and staffing, so continue to work on better communication and better customer service with our residents. That was the highest scoring one for that one. And so the way we're looking to address that is with that customer service rep in FY23. That's why we prioritized that position, was to tackle that specific issue. And then enhanced city service delivery and increasing FTEs throughout the departments. Those ranked high as well. And that's why we're proposing the 4 FTEs in FY23 that I mentioned. We're also we're recommending we repurpose 1 FTE from 2 part-time. We haven't had any success with recruiting part-time code enforcement officers. There's been more of a desire for kind of getting more into planning and zoning along with that. So we feel like reclassifying that to a zoning enforcement officer, assistant city planner, we're actually going to have a lot more success recruiting someone. They'll be full-time, they'll be able to help out the code enforcement officer with code enforcement from more of a project management standpoint as well. But we've been doing a lot better with code enforcement, I can tell you that. And what the last piece that's really missing is that extra support, but also a lot of the code amendments that we hope to bring forward to you over the next few months that will help us be more successful as we take these cases to court. But we're getting better and better. I'm looking at the numbers every week, and the compliance is going way up in terms of where we're issuing notice of violations before they get to court. So that's exciting news. But there still are plenty of cases that are being taken to court on a monthly basis. And then miscellaneous LED light bulb replacement for city buildings was the highest ranking one for the miscellaneous category. We've been doing that. Kenny and Calvin have been proactive with the police station, the fire station. As light bulbs go out, they've been going in and changing it up so they can support LED lighting. And Jay's been looking at that for the community center. That's the one budget item that we did have to add to address this priority. Was about, as a placeholder, $50,000 we put in the FY24 budget to replace the existing light bulbs at the community center with LED lights. Jay is still waiting for some updated quotes on that, so when we have that, we'll update you. But we tackled your priorities to the best of our ability with this budget. So executive summary of the FY23 budget. So how did we get such a large contribution to our reserves this year? If we allocated 100% of our debt service savings to tax relief, well, it's because our revenues were still higher than our revenues grew faster than our expenditures grew. So that resulted in a surplus, structural surplus, which is always where you want to be. You want to be in a structural surplus as an organization, because that means you're financially healthy. And then what you decide to do with those surpluses, you have options. You can apply more tax relief, you can put them in reserves, which is always a good recommendation, invested in more capital. Here we're putting it into reserves. We want to continue to strengthen that, but you can see the revenues grew by 6.3%, while expenditures increased by 1.57 million or 2.85%. That's how you get the surplus. This year, the reason for the revenue growth is a lot stronger real estate and personal property tax assessments, so taxable income went up due to a much stronger market right now by $3 million, stronger economic growth, tax revenues by $350,000, and you can see a lot of the departmental revenues have also gone up as well, which is another major category. In terms of pay raises, I talked about this 11.68% average pay increase in FY23, and then we talked about the tax rate reductions from a real estate tax perspective. For every $100,000 that your house is worth, your bill drops by $80 because of this tax rate reduction. So if your house is worth $200,000, you're getting $160 tax relief. That's how to do it. Just multiply it by the number there if you want to figure out how much tax relief you're getting on your bill from the tax rate reduction. Remember, we don't control assessments. The market dictates assessments. We control the tax rate. And so we're recommending reducing the tax rate. Capital budget, $5 million decrease. It's not that we're investing less, it's just last year had a lot of ARPA-funded culvert projects, and I think those are going to slide over to the FY23 budget. There's no way we're getting them done this year, and we're applying for a lot of grants. But they're still in the FY22 budget. The other big project that was in FY22 that drove a higher CIP was the high school roof project as well. Mm-hmm. That's not, of course, being replicated in FY23. Then reserves, we talked about this. We finally got to this point where our debt service payment dropped significantly. We saved a lot of money over the last few years through refinancing, but this is a structural decrease that we've been waiting for the longest time, and we applied 100% of these savings to tax rate reductions. Enterprise funds are not as strong as the general fund right now. When I first got here, the water and sewer fund was a strong one, and the general fund was not. But the water and sewer project or budget, the problem with this fund is that we haven't increased fees in well over 10 years. Calvin doesn't remember when the last time. It was before his time that we raised fees, or before his time specifically with Public Works. So We haven't touched those rates in the longest time, and you can't do that. If you're trying to do pay raises and you're dealing with inflation, you can't just go years and years without touching rates. There may be ways that we can address that, and the biggest issue is going to be your debt, which represents 31% of total spending on water and sewer fund. That debt position does drop. So remember how we were concerned with our general fund budget, where 25% of the budget was debt. For water and sewer, it's 31%. So we're in the same position that we were from a debt standpoint. But that's because debt, for infrastructure, it's always going to be like that. You're always going to have a high debt position because of capacity issues as well. But there is going to be some debt relief towards the end of this 10-year period of this model, where you could explore rate reductions at that point. But in the interim, it's just not going to be possible as debt remains too high in water and sewer, and we just haven't touched those rates in the longest time. So we are looking at least to keep up with inflation. Last year, inflation in the U.S. was about 4.7%, and actually the first quarter of this year, I think it's averaging over 8%. So inflation is way outpacing the rate increases that we're proposing.
What did you say inflation was?
I believe it was 4.7% last year, and it's over 8% in the first quarter of this year, or the last quarter of last year. I got to go back and check that out. But I believe it was the first quarter of this year, it was over 8%.
Oh,
So we're seeing massive inflation.
But inflation doesn't touch our water and sewer
It
purchase
does,
costs.
so fuel is one of those components as well. We're seeing a 57% inflation in fuel costs. Every vendor we talk to, every supply we try to get, we're seeing inflation impacts. Every equipment piece that we try to buy.
Okay, I see what you mean. Okay, got it.
That, you're right.
I thought you meant the purchase of water.
Yeah, no, what they're charging for water. But at the end of the day, if those who provide us water are getting hit by inflation, they're eventually going to pass it to us as well.
Okay,
So in terms of the water rate increases.
good point.
This would have been higher also for not the downtown, because we've been adding tap fee revenues and additional users in our model. That's what prevented the rates from being even higher. Stormwater, solid waste budgets. For stormwater, it's an 8% rate increase. We've seen this coming for the last few years. Again, we're very hopeful. I had a good call today, Alan and I. We think we can get this issue resolved via creative ways and not incur the massive spending, but I don't want to promise that until we have something better. But I hope over the next few months we can bring back something that will help us ease the burden on our residents over the next few years with dealing with the DEQ and EPA mandates for us to reduce our pollutant load and to charge the fees to be able to do so. You can see what the average rates are, about 7.7% average increases per 10 years. We're hoping to bring that down next year if we can fund those stream restoration projects via creative private vendors who can do the projects for us in a much better way than we've been thinking about this. So, good call today, so I'm hopeful we can come back with a better solution. Solid waste, this one's a tough one. I'm not sure what we can do with this one. A 7% rate increase, which is about $12 increase for residents in the year. And this is being done preemptively because we know when we go out to bid this summer, we feel that the prices are just going to be much higher because our current vendor already wants to increase fees above what's allowed via contract because of rising fuel costs. That's what a lot of dump trucks do, they drive, right? So a lot of fuel costs, just general inflation, wage inflation, right? There's a lot of cost impacts to this industry that we feel are going to be captured in all the bids that come back to the city as our contract expires. So we're preparing that. And if you look at my last year's budget text, whenever I talked about this fund, I said, we can do the XYZ unless contract prices go up. Unless contract, I kept saying that in last year's budget, and that's what we see happening now. Unfortunately, it's bad timing with the massive inflation we're seeing nationwide and globally to be going out to bid for a new solid waste contract.
What's the current rate right now for the solid waste? What are residents paying?
I have a slide that I'll show you, and I'll show you the dollar increase each year.
Yeah. So you're saying $12 increase is yearly or?
Yeah, it's the annual. So in the year, you'll pay $12 more in solid waste fees. For stormwater, you'll pay also $11.91 more in the year for that.
Oh, I thought it was 10-year span. But
no, I wish. Yeah, $12 over 10 years.
Wow.
Can we get like a home discount since we have the transfer station?
We'll see. But they have to be profitable. That's the issue. You're just seeing costs go up across the board.
But the cost should be less because, if they're just going from there.
Yeah, but I'm
then
saying
we're only
overall
2
costs
miles.
are going up that I think will outpace any benefits that they have.
Okay.
I think that was the original plan,
Yeah.
the original goal.
Correct, plus the revenues that we'll be getting from that as well, but those are still we don't know what those are yet. So that hasn't been calculated in this. So that can also help out next year when we finally figure out, when they're finally fully running and they're collecting those extra fees for us. We'll see what that revenue looks like, and we can reinvest that in reducing rates.
But they also get,
Also relative to what other companies are going to estimate
Yeah.
for us, when it goes out to bid.
Okay, for the overall budget, you can see the whole city budget, all enterprise funds, all general fund items, our city schools, we increased by just under 1% from the FY22 budget amendment. That's the more apples to apples budget comparison, because that introduced ARPA funds, just like FY23 has ARPA funds still. And you can see the largest, again, source of revenue increase. So you can see the departmental revenues right below as well at 11%. So we did get a lot more revenues from our departments this year as well. We got a lot of grant revenues, which is very exciting, but other revenues as well to help departments out specifically. And then from an expenditure standpoint, you can see the big drop in debt. That was a highlight. And then finally, the ability to actually contribute something to our reserves as well. These are the major highlights that I get from this slide. The general fund budget, the total budget, is presented here. You can see that the total budget was about a 1.9% decrease from the FY22 budget amendment. And you can see how much tax relief we're providing. That's a highlight for us from a revenues perspective. From an expenditure standpoint, really the big driver of spending increases is going to be those pay raises that I talked to you about, that $1.4 million being thrown in there. Then that also creates a $360,000 impact on benefits that go up as well. So your retirement, your FICA, everything goes up as you increase salaries as well. And then just a few weeks ago, I briefed you up on the massive increase in health insurance premiums as well that we face. Those are some of the biggest drivers of expenditure increases in our city. And then I know the question was asked by the mayor a few weeks ago to touch on fuel inflation. That's at 57% and about $78,000 for the general fund specifically. That's how much more money we're being impacted just by fuel next year.
Laszlo, I had a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, so it's a 57% inflation in fuel.
57%.
We're already close to exceeding this year's budget amount. So in FY22, we're going to have to do another amendment for certain items to increase the amounts that we're spending on certain of these items.
Laszlo, can you remind me, I think when we talked about the needs of the departments, there was a police, dispatchers, we did social service. What did the fire department need?
Fire department, the two biggest issues for them, number one was building up staff so we can adequately have a minimum team to respond, which would include the ladder truck as well. This 10-year model actually addresses that. To get us to not full staffing, but the minimum staffing required for that ladder truck, I do it over the 10-year model. I don't start that in FY23. I believe I start the first 3 employees in FY24. But just as an aside, we are applying for a very large grant to get a lot of those employees sooner, and then to be able to pick them up with the budget model that we have here as well. Their second priority was the deputy fire marshal position, because our current fire marshal, he's by himself, so he's on vacation, we don't have coverage. He's also the admin lead for the entire department, so he's the one helping develop the budgets for that department and manage the IT initiatives for that department as well, along with his fire marshal duties as well. We use other firefighters, we get them trained to help them out as well. But for long-term succession planning and for better coverage, we feel that a deputy fire marshal, and that's budgeted in the latter part of the 10-year model.
I see. But right now, we don't. The staffing was for the fire truck, basically the
ladder truck.
Ladder truck.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So where our money comes from, this is the source. This is the dollar bill thing that we show every single year. The interesting thing with this is, even though the assessments went up pretty dramatically, and we did reduce rates, so the total share of property taxes should have been much higher, right? But their growth was actually flat from last year in terms of the share of the total budget. And that's because our economy is recovering. So sales taxes are way up, BPOL's looking good, and even meals taxes over the last few months have gotten back to pre-pandemic levels. So our economy has fully returned, and in many cases it's actually doing better than pre-pandemic levels. And of course you have inflation baking that as well. The one exception, sales tax, we did take out a piece of the projected growth in sales taxes pending the grocery tax discussion that the state's having right now. We don't have a grocer here, but there's things like the Dollar Tree and other businesses that sell grocery items that could be impacted by that law. So if that law doesn't happen or doesn't apply to localities, then the sales tax revenues will go up in the budget amendment. But the good news is our economy is getting better. So where tax dollars go, this is great news. So down 4 percentage points for debt service, and public safety is finally now higher than debt. So we're finally spending more on public safety than we are on debt, and that's great news. And in 2019, in my first budget, we were spending more on debt than we were all 5 departments combined, net of their revenues. We've gotten past that, thank God. So debt's going down, and we're in a much better position. This slide changed from the one that you may have in front of you, and that was posted on the website over the weekend. There's just one minor change. I made an error, and I fixed the formula for personnel cost. So it's $20 million. So the share is about still can't read that, 73%. I believe it says there, and 18% for other costs. This section on the right was correct. And it shows you the breakdown between salary and wages and benefits. So you can see, just like the schools, just like most entities, right, that are not capital intensive, labor is going to be the biggest cost for us as well.
Mm-hmm.
For departmental nets, very similar story to the last few years, just as a reminder to all of our residents that we do get state support, especially for social services. That's the biggest source of revenue for them. So our departments, again, do generate revenue. So not every dollar you see in an expenditure line item for the department comes from your tax dollars, right? A lot of it comes from other sources. Like for DSS, you can see how much comes from mainly the state. For Calhoun's Community Development Department, a big chunk comes from VDOT for road maintenance. And then this year we're getting continuing to get a lot of money because of the downtown development in terms of permitting fees as well. We always argue police and fire need more state support. HB 599 needs to be increased. The fire department needs a better, more steady flow of money from the state as well. But the fire department generates revenue mainly from the EMS calls that we bill out to health insurance companies. Unfortunately, more and more health insurance companies keep pushing that to their deductibles. So we don't get a lot of that money. The best always is Medicare and Medicaid that reimburse at 100%. But we do generate some revenues from the fire department for EMS calls. And then for police, we have a lot of different grants, the DMV grant this year, the COPS grant. We get a lot of grant money. We get court fine money, parking ticket revenue as well. That helps to reduce the impact on taxpayers of our state's funding. And then for Jay's department, Parks and Rec, they operate a little bit more like a business in terms of generating revenues based off of sales of products such as memberships and other services that they provide. Their budget's growing this year, but that's mainly because of 2 things: part-time labor in terms of the minimum wage continuing to escalate, and then also the library getting to the downtown model. The beauty of the library is we're still spending what we would have been spending had we stayed with the county. It's in our city now. Even with the downtown library, the much larger downtown, spending the same amount of money as we were with the county, but it's our library. So it's still a much better deal. So we saved money over the last few years through the neighborhood library concept when we needed that money the most. Now that we're in a much financially stronger position, we'll have a much better library, and we're still spending the same that we would have been had we stayed with the county. So it's a great deal. So overall, the nearly $22 million that our 5 line item or line departments spend cost taxpayers $15.6 million. They don't cost the full $21.9 million. For the 10-year model, the key here for this one is you'll see 23, 24, 25 are heavily inflated because of ARPA, right? And you can see 25, half of it, starts going down because we only have ARPA for the first half of the year. So that fund transfer, where I have that red box, goes down once we lose ARPA money. So the budgets are kind of inflated right now because of ARPA. So I just want everyone to kind of remember that if you see budget decreases, it's not that we're necessarily doing cuts. It's just we don't have ARPA money in perpetuity. The other thing to notice here is just again the benefits of the downtown. I tried to be a little bit more conservative this year and put like a little bit more delay in when things are coming and not so robust. So that means that the best when we're successful with the downtown, that's going to mean even more money for us in those 2 items. It's not just the economic development tax revenues, but property taxes in terms of commercial real estate. Actually, commercial real estate this year outperformed residential real estate in terms of assessment growth. So commercial real estate is starting to pick up as well. So that will help us out as we get commercial businesses here to draw even more revenue growth as well. Plus all the additional residential units that we're bringing in, that adds to that property tax row as well, not just from real estate tax, but when they, for their vehicles for personal property tax as well. And then transfers to schools, and I'll show you this on the next slide, but you can see the road there. I'm putting a lot more in the out years towards schools because I am betting on us being successful with downtown and the state adjusting how much money they're giving us. You can see, let me just quickly go to the next slide here. By FY31, which is the last year of last year's model, right? So last year I presented FY22 to 31. This year, it's $1.7 million more by FY31 that year for schools in this model to give us that cushion if we need it, if the state's going to reduce. And if they don't reduce, great, we have more money for schools if we want to do voc tech or other priorities that you may have. Going back, contributions to reserves, that's the other highlight here. You can see how much we're contributing over the next few years to really build up our financial position. Okay, so moving on to budget growth over the 10-year period, we're looking at about 2.28% average. Again, underperforming what current inflation is dramatically. You can see that big drop in 25 and 26 as we lose ARPA money, and then again, from that we grow back because that's a temporary dip and loss of ARPA money. And again, a lot of this actually isn't actual spending. A lot of this is counted as expenditures, but it's a contribution to reserve funds. You see this year $2 million, next year $2.5 million. So a lot of our budget growth is in contributing, putting that money aside in the bank to give us a much healthier financial position and more options in the future. So this is the modified tax cut plan for this year. As if you recall, as we forecasted getting out of the financial mess we were in, we started off with a model where we'll increase 1 penny each year, for over a decade to start getting that tax rate down. Last year we went ahead and just did a 2-cent reduction instead of a 1-cent reduction as the finances approved, and this year we're able to do an 8-cent reduction. I think we can keep being more aggressive, but again, I'm being conservative here for the worst case scenarios, and that's why I'm from now on, since we're essentially front loading this year a large tax rate reduction, and then we take a year off, and then we do another 1 penny. But again, we've been doing more than what we've been promising, right? So the last few years we've been promising 1 cent reductions. We did 2 last year, now we did 8. So the goal is going to try to do more and more, but I like to always budget conservatively for the worst case, right? So that if there's a downturn or anything else, we're not going back on our promise of continuing to try to do tax rate reductions. We'll at least try to do this as a minimum. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it could actually be more than 1%?
Right.
Yeah, so those years it could be more than a 1 penny, just like it has been the last 2 years.
Basically, you're building a cushion in, so if the Great Recession of 2008 should reappear,
We're not going to spike. Actually.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is what's happened in the history of the city a time or two.
Absolutely. I like to take because again, our reserve position is still down. I know reserves aren't always the sexiest thing to talk about, but they were incredibly constraining to us, our weak financial position just a few years ago. We had to borrow short-term notes to stay afloat as an entity, and we had the state on our back, we had our creditors on our back, and you just don't have any flexibility when you don't have any reserves. And unfortunately, from a cash position, the water and sewer fund was taking care of the general fund. That's a no-no.
Reserves are so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, potential to go a lot faster with more development, and again, the continual budget practices that we have where we can probably continue to add to reserves just from our annual surpluses. And that means that we have to contribute less to reserves in the budget, and that means we have more money back in the budget to do even more aggressive tax rate reduction, pay raises, other things that we want to do. In terms of pay raises, we updated this model. We looked again at the market again as an update for this year because we always want to stay ahead of the game and look at what other jurisdictions are doing. As a reminder, we started the 75% reduction for the community development department, specifically public works, in this mid-year budget amendment. That's why their number looks smaller because we already put a big chunk in there for that. Same thing with police. We took a big chunk a couple years ago when we froze 2 officers and reinvested that in salaries. So before that, their number was much higher. But overall, the gap in dollar amount is about $1.9 million, and that's been pretty steady over the last few years in terms of what the gap is with the other jurisdictions. And then the plan, again, is to reduce that over the next 4 years, but to front load a lot of that gap reduction in FY23 using ARPA money. That ARPA money then is again used in FY24 to sustain that $1.382 million increase. It's used again in FY25 for half of the year, and then the budget is able to, city itself is able to pick up all those pay raises midway through FY25. And then the city then picks up the full amount of decrease at $482,000 in FY26. Does that make sense? And then again, beyond just the you can see in this chart here, we have 11.68% pay raise, and then we start doing smaller COLAs right now so that the budget can withstand that, right? We're doing a pretty massive pay increase this year if this is approved. And so for the city budget to be able to withstand that, it's a little bit smaller COLAs this year, unless you all want to be more aggressive and shift around other things as well next year, or hopefully again next year our economy continues to get stronger and stronger. We can do even stronger COLA than that. And in 26, you see that larger increase, 5.78% average. That's to reduce the gap for the full 100%, and then a little bit stronger COLAs of 2.5% going on beyond that time. Any questions on this? Okay. Economic development revenues to residential revenues. I show this chart every single year. Just the goal again is as the downtown and the economy is grown, we hope that we can reduce the burden on our residents and property taxes, and that the economy and economic development revenues like sales tax, fee pool, and meals tax will pick up a bigger share. Those are great sources of revenue because a lot of those come from residents outside, or non-residents, or people outside the city coming in to buy something here. So we're using their money to reduce the burden on our actual residents as well.
Hey, Lazo.
This assumes that we're reducing tax rates. Yes.
For curious, the townhouses by the community development, are those up and running, or they still?
Which townhomes?
The townhomes that were being developed.
Are they? We don't know their timing. I mean, they should be ready to build. Do you have any updates, Calvin, on the one right next to the Public Works building? Those 13 townhomes.
Creeks at Mosby Ridge.
Mosby Ridge, yeah.
Yeah, they've already been approved.
So they just, okay, yeah, so they already have all their approvals. They've seen this.
But it was 13
Yeah, 13.
total, right? But we're not gonna get much from that.
No, it's something, but it's not much.
No.
And again, you can see the economic revenue growth is driven by the downtown. FY22 was a rebound year, right, for our revenues. That's why it's shown as such a high percentage growth that year. Still growing strong this year in 23 beyond kind of a rebound, and then you can see the impacts of the downtown and then kind of the leveling off post-downtown as well. For the debt, as a reminder, if you had FY19 plotted in here, the bar would be up here. We've dropped ever since that, and now we had that final drop here in FY23. It's actually 1.3 million, so that's a typo. It was 1.5 million, but through refundings and everything else, and up-fronting a lot of the refunding in the previous years, it was a 1.3 instead of 1.5. But you can see it stays relatively flat, and then FY31 we get a small drop, and then FY32 and beyond, we start getting a pretty significant drop, and we get debt capacity back at that time. And you can see that expressed here in the ratio. FY32 is when we're really able to safely incur general obligation debt for the city's needs, for schools renovations, police station renovations, all those buildings that we got to take care of. We're setting ourselves up to be able to do that responsibly in FY32, but hopefully not all at once. Hopefully they have a good asset management plan, and they can kind of space it out as well, so we don't do the same thing we did in the 2000s here. But that's why reserve will also be helpful for those projects. General obligation debt, so we always plot the total outstanding debt every year. We cut it by almost in half over the last 4 or 5 years, so we're aggressively paying down our debt, and you can see as a percentage of total of assessed value how that number grows. And then more importantly, that last bullet, we're actually going to have more cash in our bank account by either FY30 or 31 than we owe in debt. That's the definition of a healthy organization, right? So that's what we're building ourselves up to. So, and when you see kind of survival mode till FY23, sustainable to 29, and strong in the 30s, this is exactly what I'm talking about. We'll be a very financially strong community at that point, assuming the downtown takes off and we continue to manage the budget tight. Reserve positions, the last 2 years I haven't been showing these reserves as fully funded. I'll go over each of these reserves again in just case if residents are watching and want to know kind of how we define this. But we have different categories for, we don't just say fund balance, we say, well, what's the purpose of having fund balance? We use these fund balances for different things. So operating cash, that's for cash equalization, right? So what the cash equalization means is we start off the year with a certain cash position. We're waiting 6 months to get more cash from real estate tax dollars. So in order to not have to borrow money in the short term, you use that reserve to take up that piece, right? That's all your cash fund does. It's cash on hand, so you never have to borrow for cash purposes. The rainy day fund, that's for the national business cycle. When you see a recession, you should be tapping into that instead of incurring debt, right? You should tap into that rainy day fund to maintain spending levels or at least increase it. The worst thing everyone could do across the country is cut spending when you have a recession. Everyone should be increasing spending to help the economy get back. And that's what a rainy day fund allows you to do responsibly without having to incur debt to do so or to raise taxes dramatically during recession, which you also don't want to do. You don't want to be raising taxes during recession either and also hurting the economy. HR fund, that's to help us out whenever we have turnover and we have to pay out vacation time, whenever we have someone going on short-term disability and we need to backfill them, or if we ever have surge capacity. So if we had an HR fund this year and Randy's department was being that overwhelmed, right, we could say, governing body, could we tap into the HR fund this year to hire some people here for the next year or so and see what happens with these foster care numbers and see if they go back down and make those temporary. That's the beauty of the HR fund. It helps you deal with all of your personnel liabilities that you have on your book, but also temporary surge capacity, any overtime contingencies that you need as well. And then asset management, this really, you got to do a full plan, right? You got to analyze all your assets that you have as a city, facilities being the most expensive, and establish timelines, life cycle timelines for all of those assets for when they should be repaired, renewed, or even replaced in the long run as well. So you want to have a fund for that to cover any capital issues that you may have, emergencies, down payments, right? So you don't have to incur as much debt. Or when you're taking on a project, you borrow a certain amount, and guess what? Now the project's overrun. You have a fund source to tap into to address those capital issues. We don't have an asset management plan yet. I've been wanting to do one for a while. We're hoping, again, to be able to hire a general services person this year who's going to be able to help us. We've been trying to recruit someone this year. It's taken a while to help us out with that project. But that's what helps you manage your assets without going into unsustainable debt, which is what the city did in 2000. We don't want to repeat that. So you got to have a good plan for how to space out all those things and what you can do to preserve those facilities for a lot longer. So our strategy has been survival, and we're finally at FY23. So we're ready finally to move beyond survival as a city. I think we have a call in a few weeks here, Pon and I, with S&P, who I think wants to upgrade us to a more positive outlook. So we're looking really good right now, and so we're beyond survival at this point. We're now we want to sustain what we've been doing here and make sure that we're a sustainable organization going forward.
What would we be upgraded to?
I'm not sure. They're just saying they have a positive outlook and they want to give us a call.
What's the current rate? Or bonding?
I think it's for S&P. I would say double A minus. You got to see, or A. I'll get back to you on that one. Can you write that down? Check with Pon on that. So long term, again, the goal is to be financially strong, and that requires two things. What I just talked about, the asset management plan and managing your long-term debt sustainably, and strong economic growth. That's what's going to make us incredibly strong in 2020. Hopefully soon. Operating cash fund looks a lot better this year than last year, and total fund balance is important as well, because theoretically that can be your cash fund, right? All of your cash across all of your different funds can serve that purpose, and it never dips below 14.5 million, which is kind of a safe area so that we don't have to borrow short term, and the total fund balance gets really strong by FY27, where we don't have to be as concerned with cash at that point. For audits, I show this slide again because FY20 was the year that definitionally this number here, this 8.1 million, right, was more than the 15% requirement, which is this number. So that was a year. So before we could do any tax cuts or anything else, per the state and per our creditors, we had to get to this 15% reserve position, and we did it a lot sooner than we were planning. And then you can see here by FY24, the true position, which is this number, when you subtract all other liabilities, This number is finally higher, 11.4 million, than the 15% requirement. So the city truly at that point has a 15% or more fund balance position as a share of the total budget. So, and I think we're going to do that faster because we've been doing it faster than for everything else. So hopefully by the end of this fiscal year, we could actually do that, or FY23, by the end of FY23, we can get there, just with the strong surpluses that we have as a city each year, and the schools as well. And then you can just see, I'm not going to go over this, but it just has, you can see how much our financial position improves. We begin funding rainy day HR funds in FY25, and then we'll have an asset management plan that we can start funding by FY27 as well, to set us up for success in the third. And I'll scroll through these so you can look at this in real time. Rainy day fund, we don't have one, unfortunately, so we have to use the cash fund for rainy day fund. And that's bad because you deplete your cash reserves if you have to do that, but hopefully we can avoid recession here over the next few years. But as a worst case, again, we can use that cash fund to cover us during this danger zone period. But what that means, again, if you tap too much into cash, then you may have to go back to short-term borrowing. You'll have to stop your water and sewer capital spending because you'll have to rely on their cash again. So don't recommend that. So, but we'll always find ways to kind of stay afloat. But we're still technically in a danger zone from a rainy day fund perspective here over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the HR fund, but we get there, again, we get there a lot quicker. It's a smaller fund than the rainy day fund. For FTEs, there's a lot to go over here. Again, the proposal for FY23 is the assistant city attorney position. As I briefed you all a couple weeks ago, that was on the staff matrix as a major issue. There's so many contracts. You've seen how much the budget's grown because of ARPA, because of grant stuff. That means we're doing a lot more contracts. You can't just have one person doing all those contracts. It's just not sustainable. So we need some help there. The E911 dispatchers, getting 2 additional staff members there so we can go to 2 people on shift 24 hours a day for full coverage in our dispatching center, and then customer service rep to tackle one of your top priorities in your GB priorities table. And that person will be located at the entrance of our new city hall, so they can greet residents, direct them to where they need to go. Remember, we're moving community development, assessors, other positions over to the current neighborhood library. So if someone's coming in for a permit, they come in and say, hey, where do I get a permit? This person can direct them. Calls can be directed to them as well, so they can actually tally that down and follow up with the departments to make sure we're getting back to our residents, and then help out Keith with posting for social media Keith. Those are the proposed positions. I always want to remind kind of what we added during the year as well, to kind of give a full review of all the different positions. So the assessor and appraiser are city assessor contracting services. Our team there retired, so we had to bring that service in-house, and that's where those 2 positions were added. The public works admin position was briefed during the mid-year budget amendment request and approved, and as was the payroll and AP clerk to provide expanded coverage when we lost our payroll manager, and to also help out our accounts payable, because just like the city attorney is being overwhelmed with contracts, our accounts payable manager is one person being overwhelmed with a lot more transaction volumes to process as well. So that's what that position is helping out with. And then, as a reminder, all the different ARPA-funded positions over last year and this year that were planned for the ARPA budget, and you can look at that ARPA budget again, that spreadsheet, and see if you want to make any modifications. But these were the different positions that were added there. Most of these were kind of expanding services that we were never doing before, utilizing ARPA funding to address that ARPA legislation. And some of these also help out with grant processes, the special crimes detective for increased sexual assault cases that we're seeing in our city, to address that head on. The preschool assistant teacher is actually state ARPA money that we got for the first year, and then we'll use city ARPA money over the last 2 years for that one. And then we're proposing this year the 2 mental health counselors for the police department.
Leslie, the position that we hired in DSS 2 meetings ago,
Yeah.
where would they be on this?
Those are like remember when I briefed this to you, I'm treating those like the 2 fire department overhires. These are overhires
Gotcha.
that we can fit within the existing
So that
budget.
with the salary.
Because we're under, yeah, correct, because we're
Not
always
changing.
under salary.
Mhm.
Yep. So I never count those 2 additional fire employees here, because the goal is to get to average, right? In reality, if this was reflecting what your true FTE positions were, all numbers would be down, because we always have turnover, right? So the goal with the fire department overhires was to always be closer to the actual budget number, right? That's going to be the case now with DSS. Try to get closer to the actual budget numbers because of turnover.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, Lazo, what's I guess the code enforcer, we've been advertising it for what, half a year now?
More, yeah. It's been a
What's
long
the,
time.
what is
We
it?
had one promising candidate, and then background check didn't work out. So we just haven't had a lot of interest in that.
And currently, we only have one.
We only have one.
Yeah. And we're advertising for 2 positions for that?
We were advertising for 2 part-time positions.
2 part-time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My goal, again, is to turn that into a full-time.
Right.
That has a little bit more breadth, so you can get someone who's studying urban planning, who can come in, help Mickey out.
Transition
who's,
there.
Development services manager, managing everything, but also helping out with zoning, planning. Her workload is getting overwhelmed by the downtown as well, because you have a lot of things to review that are impacting both her and Dean in their time. So this person can help out with that, but also take on a project manager role in the department over the code enforcement. And so every week we do kind of project management meetings with code enforcement where we go over all the cases. We work with PD for summons, right? Who's been served, who hasn't. We track this stuff very closely, and this person can go out and help with notice of violations. Right now, what happens when Denora is out on vacation or out sick? There's no notice of violations going on, right? So this person can then back.
Well, that's what my next question was, is if someone maybe from the police department side, can they do code enforcement? Like, we have a parking enforcer. Can someone be designated for a code
This is
enforcement?
civil, so I wouldn't feel comfortable having
Yeah.
law enforcement involved. Because there's a lot more, they have a lot more property access.
I guess, yeah, that's true.
So Laszlo,
Yes.
I've got a question/concern about merging those 2 positions together, because some of the problems with code enforcement is that they're not happening 9 to 5. They're happening in the evenings, they're happening on the weekends. And by having that FTE kind of serving dual hats, we're still not capturing that prime time. So, that's something you're going to have to think about, because that's having them doing it part-time, it's still not going to solve the situation.
No, and that's a valid point. We can see about staggering shifts
Yeah.
as a solution, but no, you're right on with that.
Yeah. And my other experience, having people have dual hats, inevitably, one position will always take over, will be more demanding than the other. So
Correct.
something's going to suffer.
Yeah, no, you're right, but the thing is your all's priority has been code enforcement. So
Yeah.
That's been one of my priorities. So I do weekly meetings, I get a lot of the staff, chief is happy to participate in that as well. And we go over the stuff in detail. So as long as it remains your priority, it remains my priority,
Right.
and I keep these positions focused on that.
Okay.
So we change priorities.
I mean, is it a pay? I mean, what's the, I mean, I would think people we get some bites from,
If you guys know anyone, please send them.
Was there one single reason that you can't recruit, or
It's tough. I mean, there's just some positions.
is it salary? What is it?
I'm not sure.
Is it because it's such a niche?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, like the building official took us almost 2 years to find. Transportation, we tried a few years ago, didn't work out. This time we got lucky with Steve.
Yeah.
So it's hard to predict why certainly, it could be that there's just not enough supply out there for people. I won't spend too much time on this, but these are the priority kind of future desired positions. The VPOL, meals tax auditor, the commissioner of revenue, they used to have that in the 2000s. That's a very important position to make sure that businesses are paying what their tax liability says they should be paying as well. If we're going to be doing a lot of development here, we want to maximize every penny of that to make sure businesses are paying their fair share to help reduce the burden on our residents as well. A lot of these other positions were already briefed in the staff matrix. So I won't go
Well,
over those.
I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. Do we know how many home-based business we have?
I can get back to you with that.
Okay.
Number. Yeah, because Mickey will have that number in terms of, because you have to get a home occupation
Right,
permit.
exactly, okay.
I'm kind of going to piggyback on Yessi's question. So right now, we don't have someone that just kind of goes around and proactively looks to see that someone's operating a business out of their house.
We do it, well, not out of their house necessarily, so, I mean, when code enforcement is made aware of this, then Mickey, will follow up and see whether they have the right, permitting to do this or not, right? So we do take some kind of zoning action, but not necessarily a tax action. That's going to be dependent on the Commissioner of Revenue. For a while, we were doing some pretty good proactive patrolling with the Commissioner of Revenue joining the fire marshal, joining the code enforcement, the building official to go out to the industrial area. But again, it's tough for Debbie's office to manage that without having someone dedicated to that, because the majority of them are just going to keep doing the customer service support and not doing the proactive. Not just going around to see what businesses are operating and see, hey, do you have your business license or not, but also going through all the tax records, because they have access to all the state tax records, so they can look into that and see, what are you claiming, right? And Debbie does that. They do that, but it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
To go through all those businesses. So to make sure that it's being done for every single business, this position was very helpful back in the 2000s. And it was one of the the losses in the Great Recession, but we feel it's important to go back. So that is in the 10-year model. Some of the PD ones are unfreezing, so in your priorities you talked about not just adding staff, but unfreezing positions as well. And for PD, they had a lot of frozen positions with the animal control officer and the two police officer positions. But the parking enforcement officer, we think we're going to have the money just from increased parking tickets to pay for that one without impacting the city finances at all. For fire department, this is what I was talking about earlier with the ladder truck. And I call these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We're adding 3 firefighters in each phase, spaced out across the 10-year model to be able to fully staff that ladder truck, and then the deputy fire marshal is there as well. For the community development department, specifically for public works, first unfreeze the crew worker positions that were frozen in 2009. Remember, public works was hit 40% in the Great Recession in terms of staffing, so we want to help them recover. So it's first unfreeze those positions, and then add additional positions to cover for the growth that we had, and then the field project manager that we talked about at the staff matrix that I briefed you on a couple of weeks ago.
Laszlo, are we going to be able to implement the part-time workers for community
Yes,
development?
that's in the budget as well. When you look at the spreadsheet, and I'll show you when I bring up the spreadsheet.
Sounds good.
What that is. And then for Jay, we had the downtown events supervisor and the ground supervisor. For this slide, you can see that if all these priority positions are filled by 2032, we'll have 211 FTEs. That's a 25% increase in FTEs since 2009. But again, today, since 2009, we've grown 30%. So I'm guessing it's going to be probably 35–40% growth by 2032 compared to 2009. So we'll still be under, but that just means we're going to be continuing to be more productive and efficient than other jurisdictions. For the CIP, again, I show a 10-year model, but you're actually voting on, and so is the Planning Commission, to recommend to you all a 5-year CIP per the state. And we're going to spend more time on capital in the third meeting of this month, so I'm not going to spend too much time on there, but some major highlights for kind of some big spending items that you may see and have questions on. The $8.2 million there in FY24, that's two things. That's the acquisition, or the general fund portion of the acquisition of the building for Public Works and the Community Development Department, and also there's a $3 million contribution to the proffer fund from proffer revenues received that year that just go back to savings per the proffer fund. We actually use the proffer fund to help pay for the MBTA match that we have to do. So that's why keeping the proffer fund healthy is very important, because it limits the city's tax liability to supporting the MBTA fund. We just rely on proffer money, historic proffer money, new proffer money that we have to kind of preserve the life of that proffer fund as well. Also in FY24, why it's so big as well, you go up to the fire department. That's a lot of ARPA spending on a lot of their EMS equipment that we use CARES Act for, that we want to kind of use ARPA money to keep up to date for and to get that equipment. And then for community development, it's smart meters. So even though smart meters are a water and sewer infrastructure, because it's ARPA funded, it's in the general fund, right? So the ARPA money is staying within the general fund. That's the explanation for the spike in community development in FY23, 24, and 25, and you can see it drops out in 26 because we're doing smart meters across those 3 years, which is a very expensive project, but needed for our water and sewer, for our water meters themselves. For Parks and Rec, you can see in FY25, there's a big spike there. That's for the Signal Hill Water Park, the bathhouse, all the infrastructure there, the renovation of those facilities. That's a key decision point as well for you all, that we're proposing to get that done no later than FY25, because that building has reached beyond its end of its life cycle as well. And we're financially fit now to be able to address that project. So those are the big kind of items here that I have to look at. I'm not going to spend any time on this. This is there for you all to read and send us any additional questions. But again, every department's going to brief every single project that they have in 2 weeks, so I'm not going to spend time on this tonight. Moving on to slide 47, the asset management fund. Again, this one, we need to do the asset management plan, get a good idea, but I started off in FY19 with an amount which was based off of our total asset valuation, and I believe I took 5% of that. And that was my starting point, and I've had it grow ever since to match our growth as well. And that's how we got kind of our target level. But I'd rather actually have a robust life cycle plan in hand to see what our actual long-term asset liabilities are. Unfunded capital, you can see dark fiber is a big one, and then the streets, sealing and repaving, that was $7.5 million underfunded last year. Now it's $5 million because again I added additional $2.5 million in this budget to reduce that gap by 25% of what we should be spending each year to maintain the health of our road network. The other item for unfunded capital, this has been on here for a long time. These are just additional parking enhancements. The Planning Commission was really looking at that skate park. They may be recommending that to put that back into, at least one member was pushing it to put it back in the CIP. I've kept this there just for the governing body to look at, and then when you want to direct any of these items to make it to the CIP, please let us know. But this is something that the Parks and Rec team had developed a few years ago, kind of a comprehensive park strategy, and the skates park was one of them. That's actually not that much money. That's been on the unfunded capital liabilities. That's something you all want to consider if the Planning Commission recommends that. Just want to give you a heads up that at least one member brought that up about sliding that over to the actual CIP as well. ARPA, you can see in FY23, similar to FY22, around $6 million we're proposing to utilize for ARPA. Again, for our residents, we're receiving about $21 million. We received half in FY22. I'm sorry, the end of FY21, and we're going to receive the last half at the end of this fiscal year to spend. We're trying to split up that spending, so you can see it looks like $6 million each year until that last year. We only have half the year at that time, but we have kind of evenly spread spending plan across all these years. And we keep a small cushion at the end just in case interest rates or the interest earnings from that money don't generate what they're supposed to. For the budget edits here, this slide just kind of summarizes what's changed since the last time I briefed you all on the ARPA budget itself. So the ARPA covered premium pay salary increases went up by $263,000. Remember, we reevaluated the market this year and had to adjust it up even more, so that impacted the ARPA budget. And then $60,000 added for park playground. So that was actually, we didn't have to pay for the assistant preschool teacher using ARPA money this year, so we kept it within Parks and Rec and shifted that money to the Polk playground. Why we did that? We're going to be replacing the playground at Signal Hill Park this year, so we hope to have economies of scale, and we want to knock out Polk Park so that we give something on the west side as well, a new playground there as well for the residents there, along with the basketball courts there, which are heavily utilized by our teenagers. And then $57,000 more for the outdoor screen in the downtown, just as a cushion, right? As we bring back options to you all, we want to make sure we can get kind of the best product for the city. And then what came off the ARPA budget, so $99,000 actually spent less in salaries due to the late hiring, right? Just not able to recruit positions on time across the board. $50,000 less spent on vaccination. We kept like a cushion there this year, just in case we were going to have to ramp up any additional events for vaccinations. That wasn't the case. Demand never kind of picked back up for us to have to do that, so that was a savings. $200,000 less spent on ARPA IT initiatives. That was to balance the ARPA budget with the changes we talked about up there, and the general fund had to pick up those expenditures. And then $12,000 less for smart meters. Again, the water and sewer fund is going to have to pick up that last $12,000. Those last two bullets, I literally had to do that to cut in FY25 to balance the ARPA budget. Okay, any questions on the general fund before I move on to water and sewer? Over here, you can see we have less spending in the water and sewer fund, mainly due to less capital spending this year. But overall, again, we still need those rate increases. We've been relying on reserves over the last few years to keep us whole. But when I plug in the reserves, and I plug in this model, the reserve position goes to negative if we don't do the rate increases, and that's what the rate increases are there for. Every year we're pulling from reserves. We had a very large fund balance. We want to keep tapping that fund balance to use it for all the water system phase improvements, all the the pipe replacements, all the capital infrastructure stuff that we want to do, the water and sewer, we want to use those reserves. But if we just utilize those reserves without any rate increases, this fund goes into a negative balance. And that's why we have the small rate increases each year. But again, as debt drops, then we can relook at that in the long run. Or if we get, something else in terms of development, we may be able to drop that as well. Now, this is the 10-year operating model. You can see the user fees, thankfully for the downtown, again, the development, user fee revenues going up. That helps reduce the fee increases that we would have had to have done without the downtown as well. So the downtown is not just helping the general fund, it's also helping our enterprise funds and helping reduce the amount of rate increases we need in those funds as well. And then again, you can see the large kind of reserve transfers in FY24. That's the water and sewer share of the new public works building, not the whole $6 million, but there's a piece in there that's one of the reasons why it goes up as well, to try to acquire a building for public works, which that building has reached beyond the end of its life cycle. And you can see here that things even out, and the 28 budget looks just like the 32 budget. So there's pretty much no growth those last 5 years, but that's because debt is dropping, right? So as the debt goes down, it helps pick up all the other increases. So that's what I talked about, where you have a little bit more flexibility towards the latter half of this decade in terms of rates. So moving on to slide 56, water and sewer rate increase plan. You can see what that looks like. And again, FY31, 32, that's where you have your opportunities to really look at what you want to do with those rates. It's an average about 2% across the 10 years. And the budget growth just fluctuates based completely on how much capital spending we're doing. Again, 24, we're doing a lot of the phased water improvements, and we're also doing the acquisition of public works building if approved. This is the debt slide that I constantly reference with both water and sewer. You can see water debt drops by about $300,000 in FY23, so that helps us out a little bit in 23, but it stays steady until about FY31. That big drop in FY31 is from water debt. The drop in FY30 is because of sewer debt, YOSA debt. Now, YOSA may be adding debt this year. That's something that we've heard may happen. Hopefully they don't, at least to us, so we can keep this plan going, but you can't predict. But in terms of capacity, we don't need YOSA capacity. At least they're saying until 2045. So we're good with YOSA debt, unless, again, as they have to keep doing their capital maintenance, they may incur more debt to pay for that, and then they pass it on to the jurisdictions. But hopefully it doesn't impact our long-term debt position that much. And then water capacity, we just don't know what we're going to have to do with that in the long run, if anything. But it's the water debt that really drops in these latter years. And then water and sewer reserves, again, the total reserve position does not reach its target, but it doesn't go into a negative position. Because again, I'm trying to ease the pain on our residents who've had to deal with a lot of pain here over the last 10 years, just like our employees have. So I'm not trying to do aggressive rate increases beyond what we need. So I'm taking risk here with the reserve position of the water and sewer fund, knowing that the debt position will drop in the future and we'll be able to replenish the reserve fund in the future. If that changes, then we have to reevaluate that. But I'm trying to just do the minimum amount of rate increases that are absolutely necessary and taking some risk here in terms of reserve position. Does that make sense?
A question on the reserves for water and sewer. The meters, you decided to use ARPA funds for the smart meters instead of the reserves of water and sewer. Is your rationale just for your...
It's a very important project. It's a large, so I tried to, when we developed the ARPA budget, we tried to give a little bit to each fund to help water and sewer, to help out stormwater. Unfortunately, stormwater ended up eating a lot more of the water and sewer stuff that we wanted to do, because we wanted to do SCADA as well, which was an item on here as well that would have helped out. But again, all the culverts just became priorities in stormwater, and that ended up eating a lot of the funding, the ARPA money that we had designated for enterprise fund. But again, the ARPA budget's there if you guys want to shift things around, but we at least wanted to give something to the water and sewer fund, because the Congress did call out water and sewer infrastructure as one of the items that they wanted us to invest in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And none of the ARPA funding can go towards the Russia branch stream restoration?
Yeah, we actually have it in there for help with design engineering, but again, I'm holding off on that because I'm hoping we come back with a much better solution. I don't think we're going to do Russia branch anymore. There's kind of a preview. I think we're going to do something else that's going to be more cost effective and get us mostly to our goals.
Okay.
We'll come back and brief you on that in the next few years.
Got it.
And that will change this dramatically, but again, I always budget conservatively. So you'll see the stormwater budget still has that, but I'm trying to come up with different solutions to ease the pain on our residents for DEQ, EPA mandates. Okay, so the operating cash fund for the water and sewer, again, you can see we're taking risk here in the latter year, but after 32, with the debts dropping, that fund actually starts going back up. We're able to replenish that reserve fund after that time, but it's something we got to keep an eye on. I don't like doing this, right? If I was just making a pure management recommendation to you all, I would say do not do this, but I'm trying to balance the demands of our residents as well with what I think is acceptable risk. Does that make sense? And again, our total fund balance position as a city is going to be incredibly strong at that point. And I don't see a problem of the general fund necessarily subsidizing the water and sewer fund or the solid waste fund. Big problem with the water and sewer fund subsidizing the general fund, which is not legal. So that can't happen, but I don't have, if our policies to help ease the burden on water and sewer rates, stormwater rates, solid waste fund, and we want to use a general fund who's going to be incredibly healthy by that time, that's acceptable. And here I'm saying we're doing that from a cash perspective. Not from a fund perspective, but from a cash perspective. The general fund, now it's going to be reverse roles, the general fund will be supporting the enterprise funds in this decade. Does that make sense? HR fund is very close for the water and sewer fund, so I'm not too concerned with the HR fund. And the CIP, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because Calvin's going to go over that with you all extensively here in a couple weeks. And I just want to highlight the tap fee revenues for that one. That's all coming, again, from the downtown. We're getting a lot of money there that, again,
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you said.
the tap fee revenues are coming from the downtown development.
One
So
time.
without the downtown development, we wouldn't have had that much money for capital, which meant the fees would have had to go up even higher.
What are we doing with the tap fee revenue?
It's just going into capital investment.
Okay, got it.
And I highlighted again the facilities acquisition, the water and sewer share for the public works building. I'm going to skip this again because Calvin will go over this, but I wanted to just show you kind of a high level and have this in front of you to look at in preparation for that meeting. And again, nothing to add to this except we get to an asset management plan, but we still have some work to do with kind of long-term planning. We know kind of what we need to do with water and sewer, but we're continually doing updated evaluations as well.
Hey, Laszlo, we're adding more users to our water system.
Yeah.
I mean, with the downtown development, 8 acre possibly, the 13 townhouses. I mean, all this has to affect your projections in terms of the water rate increase that you see us
They
needing.
help us because for water capacity, we actually have excess capacity. That's one of the things that Calvin notified me about. So this actually helps us get to closer to what we actually paid for. So you're spreading the cross out of that debt across more people now to actually pay for what we kind of bought for.
Right.
We haven't been using what we actually bought for. So the downtown helps us out a lot with that. And then with UOSA, Alan took a good look at that to see kind of what the impact was going to be on capacity with the downtown. And with UOSA, again, there's no real need for city more capacity until the 2040s. So we're looking good for both sewer and water capacity now. Could there be other types of uses, industrial uses maybe, that could then change that in the future? Potentially, but we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you.
Stormwater, a slight increase. This was mainly driven from the need for additional professional service support. So Alan found himself needing to have more support for design, survey work for evaluating flooding areas and how to address those issues this year. So we thought it would make sense to add that so we can continue to evaluate those issues going forward. But again, the big item, and also for all of our enterprise funds, the admin fees back to the general fund have gone up. The reason for that, again, is a portion of my time is spent on water and sewer management, stormwater management, solid waste management, a portion of Tony's time, and she works on the budget, a portion of HR's time and payroll time, a portion of IT time. If they weren't part of us, they'd be an independent water and sewer authority, and they would need all those things. But they don't need those things because they have us. So what this is they're paying us back, right, for that. But guess what we're all getting this year? Pay raises, right? So that means that amount has to grow to help cover the share of our salaries, which are now growing. Does that make sense? But that's the one other area as well in the future, if the government money wants to evaluate general fund subsidies to the water and sewer fund, if water and sewer rates become a priority issue, you could look at that. You can state, yes, here's how much the general fund is subsidizing, it's time, right? And then that helps reduce the reimbursement. Does that make sense?
Good analysis, yeah.
So that's the case also for stormwater, but the big thing with stormwater, again, is going to be stream restoration going forward. And then you can see that reflected in the long-term model. It's not a huge spike here, it's a bigger spike in the CIP because we have to incur debt to pay for, if we're going to do, as we were previously planning to do the Russia Branch stream restoration, we were going to have to issue debt to pay for that because we just don't have the money to do it. I'm hopeful that we can do something that's much cheaper and work with a company that can, instead of issuing debt, they have a long-term payment plan that we have set up with them. So that's going to be the goal for that one. But you're still going to have, you have an increase in the base budget, assuming we're making either payments to a vendor or payment back to debt. You can see that here. So this is what I'm trying to avoid, but this is what's needed if we're going to go, a massive Russia Branch stream restoration project. That's where you're going with rates, and I'm trying to avoid that. And so this is the conservative budget. We'll see what will happen here in the next few months, but this is where we're headed for the stormwater fund. And again, this isn't something that we're saying we want to do. This isn't discretionary. This is something that's being mandated that we have to do, or we get fined by DEQ and the EPA. And what I added this year to the slide deck is to show what that does to the annual payments that residents make with these fee increases and why I'm trying to avoid them. You can see it doubles by FY28 based off the current year, what residents are paying. So we're trying to figure out ways how to ease that burden on our residents. And then again, the growth in the budget, just like water and sewer, it's going to be dependent on what extensive capital projects we're doing at the time. So for FY24, stream restoration, FY28, the large flusher truck that will likely have financing at that time to reduce the burden. But I'm showing you kind of what the full kind of financial impact is. And then here's again another place, just like I said, I'm taking risk with the water and sewer fund in terms of reserves because of the strength of the general fund to help ease the burden of rates increases on our residents. The same thing is true for the stormwater fund, unless we have another solution, right, to reduce the expenditure. But here you can see the stormwater fund is actually going to go into negative balance position, but then that negative goes down, so it gets back to positive because we're done with the big projects that we had to do to satisfy DEQ requirements. But I think, again, this is an acceptable risk because of the strength of the general fund at that time. The general fund can support these other funds from a cash basis in those years.
Although an enterprise fund should be self-sustaining.
They should. They absolutely should. So that's your, I'm trying
But I'm
to present
flexible.
a solution to ease the pain on our residents.
Right.
But if I was purely acting as a manager with my professional recommendation, you don't do this.
Right.
But I have to make sure that everything is sustainable for our residents as well.
I have a quick question. I mean, I know that at that point, our stormwater, everything will be fine, we'll be in better shape with our stormwater. When do we have to start the cycle again to do the major improvements like we're doing now?
I think that's going to be dependent on if the EPA and DEQ come out with new mandates. They have mandates that are required by FY28. I'm not sure if they're going to come out with additional mandates for stormwater or not. I don't know, Calvin, if you've heard anything beyond FY28, we haven't.
So we just need to kind of put that in the back of our head.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Again, you guys can direct me otherwise. Tell me no.
No,
Do more.
I'm flexible.
And I think always reminding our residents that these are unfunded mandates that we have to, yeah.
Again, another thing we want to, for congressionally directed funding, we actually want to throw in the stream restoration next year. Try to get that.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
The CIP, again, I just show you what the current stream restoration plan is. That's 63% of the total capital spending over the 10 years. It's just that one project. So I'm giving you a very macro perspective, and Calvin will go into the details for what all these projects actually do. And then here's the capital budget as well, which Calvin will go over in a couple of weeks. Moving on to the solid waste fund. Again, this one has a lot of uncertainty, and it's really going to come down to what happens this summer in terms of the contracts, but we're already hearing that contract prices are going to go up. So that's why we're building in that cushion of $12 more each resident pays, or each household pays on trash this year to cover that escalation. And I'll show you what that means from a total payment here on the next slide.
Laszlo, how many companies bid the last time it was put out to bid? Do we know?
Actual bids received,
Yes.
I believe it
Was it
probably
three?
3 or 4.
Okay.
No, I believe it was Republic, American, and Patriot that actually submitted. I can't remember if there was a fourth company.
Patriot was, I believe, a couple 100,000 less per year, okay, than the nearest, the next lowest bid, okay.
Republic was the second.
I beg your pardon?
Republic, I think, was the next.
Republic, okay, thank you.
So unfortunately, what that does is, so the average growth rate is now 6.6%. That's up from 2.5% last year. And again, we look at this slide from last year, so we can sustain this unless contract prices go up, and that's what we actually see happening now. And so what this means from a monthly billing standpoint, as a reminder, we did not increase rates in FY21 because of COVID-19. We wanted to give our residents a breather there. And then 22, single-family and townhome residents actually got a reduction in their solid waste fee to make sure that the apartments were paying their fair share. So dumpster fees went up, but for single-family and townhomes went down and actually matched what the actual expenditure incurred were. So this is the single-family and townhome rate. You can see what it is in 22 after going down, and then how it's going to go up over the next few years with those projected rate increases due to contract prices. I know I show Manassas as a comparable. They're at $26.59 for single-family and $27.88. So we'll get to their level sometime in FY26. That assumes they keep their level right now. I mean, they don't see contract prices, so I'm sure they'll go up. But overall, the industry of solid waste management, the costs and pricing for customers is just going to keep going, unfortunately.
Are the apartments paying now the trash fees?
Yes, they are. The dumpster fee.
The dumpster fee? Yeah.
Again, this just shows what I was talking about last year. So 21, no increase, and then the monthly decrease last year in 22 because of that adjustment that we made, and then what the monthly increase is going to be each year going forward. So enterprise fund balances this year don't look as good as they do last year because of different situations like we just talked about with contract price increases. But overall, I put the total city position, which you'll see in the next slide includes the general fund. Overall, the total city position is getting better, and that's why I feel we can take the risk. Water and sewer never goes negative, so that fund is okay. Unfortunately, stormwater. Why we're taking this risk again is it's unfair to ask residents today to deal with a long-term challenge. You want to spread out those costs multiple generations and not just have everyone who's around right now covering that. So that's why we want to take that risk now with the fund balance. And you can see, though, it gets closer back to positive during the latter years, and eventually we'll be positive again to have a healthy position. Solid waste, we've been reducing the negative balance for the last few years. Unfortunately, that reduction in negative balance is going to stop, and the negative balance will grow again over the next few years because we're trying not to do massive solid waste fee on our residents. So you can look at this as a kind of a continual general fund subsidy, but then again, it starts collapsing towards the end of the decade and gets positive again. But this is something we got to keep a close eye on here and see what else we can do for the solid waste fund to try to improve the health of the fund. But there's not a lot of good options right now beyond the fee increases, which we want to try to avoid as much as possible. When you see the next slide, though, you see the general fund, how well it's going to do, and how it pushes that total city position. We're in FY27, we're incredibly in a good position compared to where we were just a few years ago in FY 16. If you looked at the total city position, it was probably around that $10 million, but only because of the water and sewer fund, which had, I think at that time, a $14 million surplus, but the general fund was a negative, the stormwater fund was a negative, and the solid waste fund was a negative. Now it's the general fund and water and sewer fund are both going to be positive. General fund's going to grow pretty dramatically, and that will help ease the stress on our enterprise funds and allow us to do the tax rates that we want to do for our residents on the general fund side as well. But overall, again, this is why even as a manager I feel comfortable doing this, because I look at that last column there, and we're going to be a healthy city financially. We're not going to have to stress out. And so I think it's worth taking that risk on the stormwater side because of that massive burden being put on today's residents. That's not fair. That should be spread out. And then again, the solid waste, trying to figure out how to best address that without impacting our residents too much with trash.
Those numbers look wonderful.
Yes. With that, let me open up the spreadsheets. Two spreadsheets this year, one overall budget, which includes the ARPA numbers, and then one ARPA budget, which just shows the ARPA items if you want to just take a look at that to focus in. No real changes to the format of the spreadsheet for this year, but for our residents back home, if they want to take a look at this, the most important tab, the two most important is going to be this budget overview, because it gives you a summary of everything that's happening at a high level for the general fund, water and sewer fund, stormwater fund, solid waste fund, even our schools as well when they briefed us last week, so we updated their numbers, and then the total city, combining everyone. And then if you want to get the detailed analysis of what's happening by a line item basis, you go to this tab here called line item, and it structures, I don't know where it started down, let me scroll up. So it structures it with revenues green up top, and you can see what the revenues are budgeted in 22, and then the actuals, and then how it grows over the model for each revenue line item, what the average growth percentages are, and you scroll down. These are all the different revenues. You get to the total revenues on the bottom. A lot of line items. You get to the total revenues on the bottom, which is always going to be bold, and then you move on to expenditures, which is that reddish, pinkish color there. I highlight all the new positions. So I separate out every position that I'm adding. I always separate out from the salary line item so you can see what those positions are and what year they're being funded. FY23 positions are highlighted. Other positions added later in the model year are not highlighted because those, again, that's not your, that's next year's governing body to decide whether they want to fund that. This is more of a plan. So the highlighted ones are your discretion if you want to add those now. Of course, you can pull some of those other positions and say, no, we want to do that now. That's why I present those always. And so let me scroll down as an example here. Commissioner revenue, you see the B-Poll meals tax auditor. So $0.23, $0.24, so it picks up in 25. So that's how to read the spreadsheet. So if you want to figure out what year the position is funded, you look at it that way. And then the premium pay, we also highlighted that one using ARPA money. You can see the share of ARPA money for each department. And then that's cut in half in FY25, and the city picks up half, and then the city picks up the full amount, 26. And that's going to be true for every single department that's employing the premium pay increases. The central departments don't, so this city manager's office, finance, IT, HR, we don't use ARPA money for those pay increases because it wasn't called for in the legislation.
So premium pay equals ARPA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whenever you see EC, I should see like EC 4.1, that's how the federal government and the treasurer is tracking every expenditure code. So we want to make it easier for David to report back to the federal government. We structure our budget that way to have our line item to the left and then the actual federal code in the line item description so he can do an easier budget roll-up to send over to the federal government.
And the ARPA premium pay increase does not include leadership positions.
It does include deputy directors or directors and then the central offices.
So we'll have to do an increase the following year?
No, so this, because we're using ARPA, remember in last year's budget, I was doing 25% reduction using city money. So most of those employees in that 25% reduction now are being covered by ARPA, which freed up funds, city money, and then apply towards department directors and deputies and the central offices for our pay raises.
So they'll get pay raises at the same time?
Exactly.
Okay, good.
It just comes out of different buckets.
And just for the record, to confirm it, we're closing the gap pay-wise for the constitutional offices just as we are city employees.
And the
Okay.
registrar as well.
Okay.
And this includes the fire department and police department?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Leslie, which tab would I go to if I want to see, compare actuals, 21 actuals to the 23 budget?
Yeah, it would be this tab here. I think we hid some also. So we hid some, right? So we'll have to unhide it. We'll repost it, but you can just unhide.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can,
Everything's really, line item is going to give
We
you
just saw
everything. except for
71
CIP.
slide presentation.
Gives
oh,
you
good, so
FY
19 and 21.
FY 21.
Excellent.
It just, we were tired of looking.
It survived.
so we
Yeah,
hid
yeah,
it.
sure, no, I understand, yeah, that's good. Okay.
So you can see all those previous years there. And you scroll down,
Refresher training.
you have all the departments here. You see all these yellow, or these, I guess you have the bright yellow and the not so bright yellow. The not so bright yellow is all the ARPA stuff. So it is in the budget. We kind of throw it in there, and it'll have that EC code in there as well.
And did we add the?
Here as an example, vaccination, family services specialist. What was that?
Oh, no, I was, question was, did we add the school stabilization line this year, or, I mean, for the FY '23?
The new reserve for the
The
school.
reserve, yeah.
I have not.
Okay.
I'm awaiting, well, number one, we have to wait to see what the state says. Is
Yeah.
the state going to give all that money to the schools or not?
Right.
Let's hope they do.
Still,
If
I
they do,
see.
and then you guys need to direct me, are we doing
Yeah.
this or not?
Okay,
And I
I'll
can
wait.
show, I can create it. Where I would create that is in this reserves tab. This is where we have the operating cash fund, the rainy
Right.
day fund, HR fund, asset management. I would insert a row
Yeah.
here, and I would call it school stabilization fund.
I see.
And we have, it would be part of your reserves, but for that specific
Right.
effort. But let's hope the state comes through with the money.
Yeah, yeah, because that's a positive thing to do.
Okay, scroll down, and so if you want to see our, that's our debt, you see kind of the annual debt payments, and where they've been, where they're going. You see reserve contributions between operating cash fund, the rainy day fund, the HR fund, and then I put the asset management fund down here in capital. And then you have ARPA capital, so you want to see what are we spending from ARPA, on ARPA capital every year projects, it would be this one here. 3 million, 3.4 million, 1.1. Schools, this is where I talked about with schools and the increased amount compared to last year as you go through the later parts of the model. Contributions to county, those that go up this year, so you can see another increase there. And then the total general fund, and then whether you're at a surplus or deficit.
Don't we get an increase of, like inspection and certificate of occupancy fee as well?
Yeah, so I'll scroll. That's in revenues. So we have our revenues set up by taxes, but we also have them set up by departments. So it starts off with taxes, real estate and personal property, economic revenue, so sales tax, vehicle, meals tax, cigarette tax, and then it starts going into the departments. So
Okay.
the commissioner of revenue, the treasurer, the money we get from the state for them, police goes down all of their lines, fire, and then what we were talking about here was community development, so all the
Okay.
building permits, zoning permits, everything else that we have here. You
Okay.
can see how high they are in these years. Look at FY '23, how much that is because of all the construction happening.
Can you refresh my memory up there? It said M&T tax.
Yeah, that's machinery and tools tax.
Okay, thank you.
It's part of the personal property tax. So,
Yeah.
but it's just on businesses.
I just didn't know, couldn't remember what the M&T stood for.
We live in our own acronym. So
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the county contribution,
Mhm.
what was the health district, how much we contributed?
Yeah, I'll show you.
And if they roll it out, it would be increased
Like 40,000, I think, right?
by the
21.
100, yeah, almost.
100, oh, sorry. I lowballed them big time.
Just multiply it by 3.
Contributions to county.
gigantic.
So we look here, there's two different pots of money. There's when it says regional service,
Yeah.
that's different elements, but for health, it's the state. So this is what we give to the state. So in '23, you can see it's about
Mhm.
61,000. And then you have the county, which is, so everything you see that says shared
Yeah.
is county. So you see another health, that's what we pay for overhead management, right, of the
Right.
health. So combined is, I can't read that, I think it's 91,000. But
Like
that's how you would look
about
for it.
90,000, yeah.
You would combine those two.
And then if we roll it with them, the state will go away, but then
Yeah. it would
the
all be
regional
shared
will
services.
increase.
Absolutely. This
Right.
number here with Skyline.
Yeah.
Now, in the library, you can see it used to be with the county.
Right.
and
Yeah.
Now it's in Parks and Rec.
I mean, even if we don't have a decision by then, it won't, will it affect the budget anyway?
It's not going to impact 23 because they're not proceeding in 23, but in 24 is when we'll see.
Oh, it's not proceeding in 23?
No, they're not proceeding.
Oh.
What they're trying to do is what's called a soft transition, where he
Oh, I
wants to
see.
use the ARPA money. He's recommending the county board of supervisors
Yeah.
to use their ARPA money to do a lot of the upfront acquisitions so that we can be ready. by
For
FY
24.
IT and stuff like that.
Correct.
yeah.
I see, okay.
And then you go down and you can see the water and sewer, same thing, all the revenue line items, expenditure, every single line item, and it keeps going down to stormwater and solid waste. 10-year summary is just if you want to see the summary of the 10-year model. That's all it shows by major program. You can see from an expenditure standpoint, I combine community services, our newest entity, with social services, just call it health and human services, from an expenditure standpoint, just so I minimize the amount of rows that we have to create here from the summary standpoint. And it really truly is now a full health and human services function. And CIP is the next most important after line item, because it's the equivalent of what the line item budget is, but for every single capital project, every single capital revenue, transportation being the largest. You can see all the sources of transportation revenue, and we're throwing a lot of grants now into this as well. We're hoping to get a lot more grants going forward, trying to get tap into that infrastructure bill money as well as much as we can. Proffers, and then ARPA and other sources of revenue, and then every single line item for every transportation program, or I'm sorry, for every CIP program. And the capital budget just summarizes each project with some comments. And the CIP summary gives you the 10-year outlook by program. Debt just goes into more detail on what the different principal and interest structures are. It's more if you're an accountant, it's more looking at these things. And then Chris builds the fleet tab that shows you every single vehicle and what in the enterprise enterprise
That is
plan
nice.
and when they get acquired and what the ongoing payments are for every single vehicle.
It's very well organized.
Yeah.
Reserves, I already told you what this one is. It's really just for the general fund and the water and sewer fund. Fund balance shows you what the audit looks like in the historical audits, and then what I project it to look like based off budget performance in the future. And then this is the PowerPoint slide that I showed you that has every single unassigned position and then total positions here in the right column.
Is this available for the public to see?
Yeah, it's already posted on the website. It just depends how many numbers they want to look at. That's why I always say for residents to really start off with this budget overview.
Okay.
That gives you the quick synopsis of what's happening. And the other tab for residents that may be useful is this budget charts. It just has everything kind of summarized in charts.
Very nice.
If you want to see it that way. Every single chart that we have. And it's based off this timeline information. So if you want to see the data that feeds in this chart, if you're a nerd like I am, you'll go over here.
So another question regarding the budget too. I guess the food bank, the CAFB requesting $80,000. Can we fit that? I mean, it's up to the body, but I think it would be a good idea to see if we could use ARPA funds towards that ask.
We could, we'd have to cut something from the ARPA fund and then decide whether we're not going to do it, or then the city will
Right.
take it up. And again, you can tap into reserves or something like that. You can tap into proffer funds or something like that. So it would be your discretion. for how you want to
And keep in mind, we don't have to give 85. We can give something smaller so that it doesn't affect our bottom line as much.
Right. Right. Doesn't have to be their full ask.
That was when I had the conversation with him, that was my concern. Because I will tell you, that was sticker shock to me.
For those who are interested in assessment information, that's the last tab. That goes over the 21, 22 by type. And then as our assessors kind of get their feet wet and we keep working with GIS, hopefully next year we can give you some really good data on kind of what's happening across the city.
Yeah, I mean, we've asked for years for an assessment map.
Yeah. We'll work on it. I want to get them first do a good transition and learn the properties, and we'll get there.
Okay.
So that's that spreadsheet. That's already posted on the website. And we'll go back in and unhide the prior years. This is the ARPA budget. This is where if you want to make any changes to ARPA, the first tab just summarizes, so don't make changes here. Okay, so you wouldn't make changes here. That just summarizes the actual budget by categories, by capital, by your priorities, showing what it is. The other tab, I'll kind of jump back and forth, but this is based off your priorities, what we're spending. This is based off the federal categories. This is what finance utilizes to report back to the federal government. So we try to link everything to this ultimately to help them with their reporting. If you want to make any modifications, go to this line item tab or CIP tab, and you'll see the revenues broken out, and then every single program that we have here. You can start playing around with this and make reductions, additions, or tell me to change something up and see what that does to the model, and we could do that. This has every single line item for ARPA.
And then this is for the full ARPA budget, the 10 million.
21, yep. That's why we
Or
break it
21.
down by each year.
So the line item is our worksheet. Okay.
And then this is
Or sandbox, whatever you want to call it.
This is every single capital project we're doing.
Okay.
I kept some of the original ones, even though they're all $0 right now, just to show that we had some other ideas as well, and we want to go back to them. Fortunately, this line item here kind of killed everything.
Yeah.
So was there any leftover, where's the,
Yeah, at the end of the term, we try to build in some kind of.
no, for the ARPA, I
Yeah,
guess,
for
yeah.
ARPA. But that's because, again, you get to accrue interest. So that's why we actually, we have a little bit more than what they say we have. And in reality, because we've been getting the other ARPA grants from the state, we have even more ARPA money. It's just it's all rolled into the regular budget. But those are specific. You apply for a specific use, then you have to do that use.
And we'll get another request from Prince William County for crisis stabilization funds, but I have no idea what that's going to be.
Yeah.
That's this spreadsheet. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint real quick. Yeah, 2 more slides. So next steps, I was trying to kind of sum up what's happening here the next few weeks. Please do review all these files, my presentation, and send Tony, Keith, Kelly, and myself your questions, and we'll do our best to organize, get with the departments, and get you back kind of the question tracker with all the answers. And then April 19th is really the next big meeting, really kind of macro level presentation of CIP. And that's usually when we ask the public to come out and start giving their initial feedback. They've had 2 weeks to review my files and come back and let you know, are we heading the right direction or not? What else do they want to see?
And when you mean project by project, you mean just for the 23 budget and the
No,
CIP?
The whole thing. Yeah, the whole thing. If you guys want to scale it back, please let me know. What's that?
I'm just wondering why.
Transparency purposes.
Okay,
Yeah.
they'll have it. It's there, right?
Yeah, so it's up
It's
to
in
you.
our budget?
So if we want to just show it and you guys can ask us any questions, we can do that as well. Yeah, the reason why I did this is because in the past, there was not a lot of insight to what was happening.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, I'm going to give you guys a full picture of everything from the CIP standpoint. If you guys don't want any more because you feel comfortable with what's happening, by all means, every department director is going to be very happy.
This is great.
So-
Good, but I think it's good education for the citizens if they decide to watch.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think people realize, like anything else, how complex anything is.
And I think it's good for us, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Will our VDOT funding, that we get reimbursed for the street maintenance, does that include the new streets that we have,
Yeah,
including the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you add new streets that get accepted into the VDOT system, then VDOT reimburses based off lane mileage. Is
Okay.
What they use to calculate.
And
So
my-
anything that's accepted into the system, the VDOT system.
and my other thing I'll mention before I forget is the three, the mayor asked about the RFP in solid waste, the trash removal services, the 3 vendors, did any of them have CNG vehicles they're more energy efficient, so they're not tied to the price of gas like the regular vehicles. But do you know offhand that there was any CNG?
Shocked if there was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't particularly ask for it
Mm-hmm.
in our request for proposals, but they may choose to highlight that in their proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're working on the RFP.
Right.
We're just trying to control the increases that they can give to us by tying it to the actual gas and diesel prices.
Okay. All right, just trying to come up with ideas.
We'll try to have the budget book to you all for next Tuesday's meeting review, and we'll start the work sessions there. And you can see the schedule, April 12th and April 26th. Who's coming here to do presentations and answer any questions you may not have about their budgets. And I'll be remote actually for both the 12th and the 26th. But I'll be on at GoToMeeting if you have any questions for me. Okay. Then your key decision points here from a short-term standpoint is, do you agree, tax rate reductions and the enterprise rate increases? Do you want to proceed with the pay raises and with the new positions? And I put kind of the dollar amounts there for kind of what you're deciding on. And then the future decisions, what do we do with the community development, schools, facility acquisitions? Do we proceed with that project or not? That's going to be a big decision here over the next couple of years. The Signal Bay Water Facility demo rebuild, that's a large project as well. And then the stormwater project, what we talked about a lot tonight in terms of evaluating options. Those are really long, strategic decisions that are no longer actually long-term. They're coming up here over the next couple of years, but they're big ticket items that we don't necessarily have to answer with this year's budget, but we want to start thinking about these things as well. With that, that's all I have.
Okay. Wow. More questions or comments?
Just, when do you need our questions back? What's the last day you get the questions back to you?
So, I think I missed this part here. So May 10th is when I need you all to decide what I'm advertising for the budget. So in reality, you want to probably get to me all your questions by the end of April.
Okay.
So we can have them answered by May 10th.
Okay.
Okay.
That's the night that we're going to ask for you all by consensus or whatever to say, here's what I want, the tax rate to be. City manager, here's what we want enterprise fees to be, not to exceed. Here's what we want you to advertise, not to exceed spending levels. And then I give that to Lana. She advertises it, and then June 7th, you hold a public hearing.
Okay.
Okay.
And this budget, as it's been presented, this is a balanced budget?
It is.
Okay.
It's a surplus.
Yeah, I beg your pardon?
There's a surplus that's going to the
Okay.
reserves.
Okay. So when we send our questions in, please copy everyone so that we all can see one another's questions. Okay. Is there anything else? Questions, comments, anything?
I'm actually excited about this budget. I mean,
Yes.
the eight
It is
cents
exciting,
reduction.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
very exciting.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
we've waited, it's almost historic. I think it's wonderful.
No,
Okay.
Feel bad for the previous council members who wanted to do this.
Yeah.
Feel bad for the previous council members who are no longer on who wanted to do
Yeah,
this.
they're heart attacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's call Hector and Miriam.
Let them know.
Okay. Oh, boy.
Thank you, Rolasso.
Okay, super. Managers report, you've already
Another
already
slide.
drained yourself,
Maybe we had a
right?
presentation.
Okay, we're going into closed session now. City Attorney, do you want to read us in?
I recommend the governing body go into closed meeting to consult with the city attorney about negotiations with MP Cinema Realty LLC to potentially amend the purchase and sale agreement for approximately 1.60854 acres of the current city hall, and to consult with the city attorney about the terms of negotiation for the transition to the Prince William County Health Department pursuant to paragraph 8 of subsection 2.2-3711A of the Code of Virginia.
Do we have a motion?
Moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?